Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born. Hey, did you know that you are part of a podcast that's listened to in over 80 countries? We just want to give a shout out to all the people that are listening from around the world. And today we are back in it talking about my book, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. I am joined by my partner behind the scenes, Moriah Hidden. She is going to interview me today. And I'm so grateful that she's joining me. But man, we are now in chapter 5. And chapter 5 is lovingly called It's Time to Grow Up. And it's all about pace, process, and empowerment. So excited to dive in today with you, Moriah.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm also excited to dive in today. This chapter really brings a lot of clarity to why innovation sometimes feels hard and how much of that comes down to the system behind processes. And so I'm excited to dive in as well. In this chapter, we talk a lot about the pace, processes, and empowerment. Which one do you think tends to be most neglected, and what practical steps can leaders take to address that imbalance?
Yeah, I think, maybe let's break these down. They're all so different in kind of how they show up in an organization. The first one is the pace, right? We know this. Like, if the pace is too slow in an organization, the whole organization is lulled to sleep. Competition will eat our lunch. We won't be around for long. And that's a tough saying. But what ends up happening kind of in the self-correction in the other direction is sometimes the pace is too fast in an organization. You come in, it's immediately sink or swim. You don't really have time to breathe. Even within the organization, it just feels like everyone's trying to keep their head above water and survive. And so, onboarding is not really onboarding. It's like, here's some stuff and good luck. And so here's the thing. When people are booked at 90 or 120% of their capacity, we're actually not leaving room for emergencies, fires, and even what's really important, which is creativity and innovation. Those things don't thrive when we're so overbooked that we don't have time to breathe. Something really cool that we implemented at an organization I worked with a long time ago was thinking days. So every Friday afternoon, we would have thinking days, and these were days where we were not allowed to schedule meetings. We would remove ourselves from the office, and we were told, go take a walk, go be creative, think outside the box, think about a problem you've been trying to solve, because it usually doesn't get solved when you're in the grind. It gets solved when you're taking a walk outdoors or when you're spending time kind of away from your desk thinking about how to solve this problem. And what I loved is that not only did it create the capacity for us to think and be creative and dream, but it also ensured that we did not burn out. And so part of what we're trying to deal with in today's society is, how do we cultivate leaders that burn on and not burn out? And so often we're worried about burnout, and it's because everyone is over capacity. And when we don't have downtime, we actually don't have time to innovate.
Awesome that you actually do get time to innovate. And I think it not only helps with more ideas and being able to come up with more ideas, but it helps the team health. And not being burned out means you can't collaborate with other team members because you're working on your stuff, and same thing with your team members. So I think it is important to realize that you don't have to fully book your employees to the max, because they do have extra time, they can even help bring ideas to the plate so that your business can be more successful. You go into the Lucy and Ethel illustration in your book. Go into a little bit how that looks like in pace in the business world.
Yeah, so man, you guys got to go back in time, right, to I Love Lucy. And, there's this scene, we all love it, especially in product development, right? Because I think it just really describes well what can happen. But they're in this chocolate factory, and they're on this conveyor belt, and they've been not very well trained, I would say, and they're just kind of thrown into the deep end. So they're in there, and, at first they're like, hey, we've got this, we can do this. But then this phenomenon happens of the inertia of the machine. It's just kind of speeding up a little bit, and they kind of go into an all-out panic, right? So they're throwing chocolates down their shirt, they're throwing them into their hat. It's just all-out chaos. It's going into their mouth. And then the manager comes in to check on them, and she's like, "Oh, you guys are doing good." And then she yells, "Speed it up." And the next thing you know, it's like even more chaos in there. And so often, when we are managing people at their capacity or past their capacity, we don't realize how overwhelmed they are. And sometimes they don't even realize how overwhelmed they are until they burn out. And so this is the perfect example of how we can think that our pace is the right pace, but we actually don't see and realize the chaos that's going on in the organization. And so often I think we move so fast that we're not slowing down to ask our team, how is the pace? Are you able to innovate? Are you able to dream? Are you able to meet with other teams and socialize your ideas? And sometimes, if we really listen, we'll be surprised at how fast people are moving in the organization and how they're not being given that breathing room for creativity. So I love that example because it's a wild one, but it really explains what it can look like in organizations if we're just moving too fast and we're pushing too much into the organization. And this happens all the time with projects where, we want to give 50 projects to a team. And what happens is nothing ends up coming out the other side. And so we'd be better to actually put 3 projects in and make sure those are well defined and moving well before we put the next 3 in and then the next 3. Sometimes we just inundate people. And instead of it moving faster, nothing comes out the other end. And that's kind of the perfect example of Lucy and Ethel and the challenges that they ran into.
Yeah, that's good. I love that illustration. You mentioned kind of that Lucy and Ethel probably didn't have a lot of guidance or onboarding material of how to get this job done. So right beside pace, we got to look at processes and making sure we have the correct systems in place so that the pace is good, but also the how to and the logistics of what we're doing is good. And the lack of processes can actually force teams to constantly reinvent the wheel. How can leaders start building frameworks that support both flexibility and structure?
Yeah. So oftentimes, I think sometimes in innovative organizations, people don't feel like they need processes. It's almost like, oh, we're either process heavy or we're innovators, but we can't be both. And I think that processes are really critical so that, there's something I call tribal knowledge, right? Where it's like in the tribe leader's head, but the tribe leader is the only one that knows it. And then they have to pass it down verbally to the other people in the tribe. Wouldn't it be great if that information was just documented in a process? And while most of us don't find that fun, just sit down and really document standard operating procedures or SOPs, these are the things that actually ensure that we don't have to recreate the wheel every time it's time for us to kick off a significant project. So, if we don't have clear stakeholder matrix, if we don't have a clear understanding of how to kick off a project, how to get it started, how to move a project through the process, how to signal to everyone else when the project is done, then that's a good sign that we probably need processes in place that help us to be successful. And I'll give you a quick example. I worked at a really large organization. I helped to start the PMO or the portfolio management office, and we had over $300 million in projects that we were managing. And we had about 100 to 150 project managers at any given time dotted line into our organization. And everyone did a project differently. So imagine getting 100 status reports that all look different. Imagine getting 100 project plans that all look different. Imagine everything you get looks different depending on that project manager and how they've decided to run the project. So we knew that we had to get everyone on the same page. We had to get everyone using the same templates. We had to get everyone using the same philosophies about how to manage a project, how to tell when it's starting, ending, how to communicate when it needs more funding or when the funding is going to overflow. And so this is the perfect example where if you don't have clear processes in place, it can ultimately hurt the organization. So it'd be no surprise for you to realize that most of the projects were behind on timelines and budget, and they were almost all of them were out of scope because not only were we all communicating differently, but there was no clarity across the board on how to communicate milestones and when things were off budget or off timeline. And so when that happens, right, there was no way to self-correct. There were no dashboards for us to see everything at a high level. So those were all the things I had to build in. And that didn't feel fun to everybody because nobody likes to be told, I know you use this template, but tomorrow you're using that template. But what we had to do was create consistency for the entire organization so that we could scale, but also so that we could actually know the health of our projects so that we could improve it. And so that's the power of processes in place is that when done well, we can be really effective with those processes.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's also important to know that it might take time to put in those processes in the beginning. And sometimes people might be like, well, we don't have time, we can't do this. But once we get it in and do the hard work in the beginning, the processes become more simpler. You get projects easier, everyone is more on the same page. And you put an illustration in your book that was really nice to look at because it really put the whole perspective in an image where it was just an arrow and it was like, this is how it's supposed to be, just a straight arrow. But if you don't have processes, it's crazy. And then you finally get to your point. And that just takes time and it takes away from innovation. It takes away from actually creating success for your business with those correct processes in place. With the pace and the process, I know there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of go about it, but a lot of people don't feel that empowerment or that encouragement from their leaders to have those innovative ideas. Can you explain how leaders can create a culture where empowerment doesn't just mean hands-off management, but rather fostering trust and accountability, and kind of how empowering people to innovate will build them for success?
Yeah, I love the topic of empowerment because I think empowerment is so important in organizations. And especially, our goal should be to find and hire people smarter than us and then just release them to do what they do best. But one of the questions we have to ask ourselves when it comes to empowerment is, are we actually giving people in the organization the ability to surface good ideas, to raise good ideas, and to actually get those ideas implemented? And if we're saying no to all those things, then we might have a problem where there's a lid on the organization and empowerment's not able to flourish. And so part of what we want to think about is, do we roll things out in the organization without actually talking to the frontline workers that will have to take on that change and actually experience that change and then communicate it to customers? If we say that we normally don't let people know in advance that change is coming, that can be a lack of empowerment. If we are not asking most people for their opinions and engaging with them, that can also be another sign that we may not have empowerment in the organization. So we have to be careful because what can happen is if good ideas only come from the top, then when someone has a good idea, instead of actually raising it or running with it, they'll just hold it. And that means that your organization is not going to improve, it's not going to grow, and it's not going to get better. So typically, if we only have one or a few people that get credit for everything, you'll find that the rest of the organization stops trying and they'll stop raising good ideas. So here's the thing. I think some of the ways that we can empower is, first, we need to ask frontline workers, like, for their observations, their opinions, their ideas. We need to ask them, what is something you've been thinking about that would make this organization better that you wish everybody knew? You also need to find formal and informal ways to cultivate those ideas and to draw ideas out of people. And then when a good idea emerges, this is so important, give the person credit for their idea and let them run with it. So often, right? Sometimes our ideas get repackaged as someone else's who's higher up in the organization. And honestly, that hurts morale. It hurts the person and it prevents them from ever wanting to give you a good idea again. So important that we not only allow them to run with that idea, but we give them a safe environment where they can fail and learn. Because that's the only way they grow in cultivating more ideas is to actually implement those ideas and then be able to grow from them. So that is part of how we really ensure that we are creating this kind of this, and again, this chapter is all about growing up. So this growing up within the organization, getting people to mature within the organization by empowering them with ideas and to solve real solutions.
I love that. I think it is important that we listen to the people below us because they could have really great ideas for different things, but if we just need to take a step back sometimes as leaders to be able to trust our team members and be able to have that open communication when ideas do arise. But if you were someone that does have an idea and you, I don't want to say bottom of the tier, but if you are not in the leadership like team, how would you logistically say that someone can go about that? And what are their first steps to really get their idea out in the most respectful but honest way?
Yeah. So again, this all depends on how an organization is made up. I think that, you know, ideally they would go to their manager and say, hey, I have an idea. Can you help me flesh this out? Can you help me, kind of work on this idea and see it through? Now, if that person doesn't support us, or worse, they steal our idea and take it as their own, that person's never bringing another idea again. So we need to make sure that when someone brings a good idea to the table, that we're helping them cultivate it. We're helping them think about how to communicate that throughout the organization. And we really become their sponsor or their champion of that idea. And if somebody can go to their leader and they'll help them sponsor or champion it, man, they're going to bring so many more ideas in the future. But if that idea disappears and now is repackaged as someone else's idea, man, you are, you're really going to stifle ideas and creativity in the organization.
Yeah, that is true. And I think it really is a self-reflection on ourselves as leaders, as how do I take ideas and what do I do with them? And do I help my employees grow, or do I just kind of block them off and not let them share any ideas? Um, Pace, processes, and empowerment all kind of come towards our maturity index. And you talk a lot in this chapter about the maturity index and how it explains how organizational maturity and discipline directly impact innovation. Can you break down the maturity index a little bit more, and how does a team actually figure out where they fall today, and what does it look like to start moving to the next level?
Okay, so I will just say buckle up, because this is probably a lot of deep knowledge that we're going to do right now, kind of to talk about the CMMI maturity model. And some of us have heard of this model, some of us have used this model in our work, but I think that looking at organizations through the CMMI maturity model is really important, right? So this maturity model goes from 0 all the way up to 5. And here's the way that I would describe it. 0 means we're all doing things differently, right? Imagine everybody running around a room, kind of running into each other, papers flying in the air. If you feel like that is what happens in your organization, you're probably sitting at a 0 today. All the way up to a 5, which is going to be defense contractors and people that are working, probably NASA, right? Those are going to be the people that are at a level 5. Most organizations can successfully get to and maintain a level 3. And so let's kind of talk through each of these levels in the maturity index, just so you kind of have a sense of them. So level 0 is inconsistent, right? It means that we're all doing things differently. And one of the things I say all the time is that if you lack organizational discipline, you're pretty much planning not to innovate, because you're so busy putting out fires that you're not disciplined in the organization. We're so busy recreating the wheel every time it's time to do something that we're actually not getting in and really truly innovating. So if we think about this for a second, it means that there is a tribe leader with tribal knowledge. It exists in his head. It doesn't exist in any documentations anywhere. So it's just passed down verbally from one person to another. But if those people leave, they take all the knowledge with them, and then we have to start all over figuring out, well, how did we get where we are? What actually happened? That's not a good way to lead. A lot of organizations sit at a level 0. They're inconsistent. Everyone does things differently. There's no consistency. When you move to a level 1, that's called initial. What that means is that the work can still be unpredictable and reactive, but you're starting to try to address some of these performance issues with process. So if you think about this, oftentimes work is delayed, it's over budget. This is not a challenging environment to innovate in, because it's a little chaotic, but people are trying, right? But mostly through heroic efforts to get things done. There are some processes in place, maybe some documentations or forms or things like that in place that people can use, but there's a lot of lack of process and control. When we get to level 2, we get to managed, and that means that we're actually focused on creating managed projects. So if you think about an entire organization, imagine the projects being managed, but nothing else. That's kind of what that level 2 is all about. So people know how to initiate a project, they know how to move it through to figure out whether or not it's performing. They can measure and monitor that project and control it, but just at the project level within organizations, nothing else within the organization is being managed but these projects. So that is an improvement. But again, where most organizations get to is this level 3, and it's called defined. So when organizations move from a level 2 to level 3, there's more of a foundation in place. So what that means is that they're able to leverage some standards that kind of cut across the whole organization. So when I think about projects being managed a certain way, now strategies are being managed a certain way. And so the strategies that kind of roll down to the programs and the projects, those are all being managed organizationally wide in a way that there's guidance, there's clarity, there's understanding. And so, in my opinion, there's a big difference between level two and level three. And here's what I would say as we kind of think about these. In the past, I would tell you to move from one level to a next. So 0 to 1 or 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, it takes 12 to 18 months. With the convergence of AI and things like that, I feel like we can move through these levels a lot faster. So, where in the past it would take us 12 months to create all these SOPs and all these standards, now using AI, we can kind of create some of these standards in less time. It's not just about creating them, it's about training people on them, making sure they know that they do exist and where they exist, and ensuring they're rolled out through the organization. So there is still a change management aspect that goes into level three, but I still believe that we can cut that time pretty significantly due to the convergence of AI. When we get to a level four, what we're saying here is that things are quantitatively measured. So most organizations, like I said, they don't push past this level because it's more expensive to actually manage all the things that you have to do at this level. So organizations are now data driven, they have clear, quantifiable performance measurements in place, and the results are more predictable and more aligned, and goals are more oftentimes met internally and externally because they're operating at a level four. Now, a level five is called optimized, and this is the last level. And so, when organizations focus continuously on their improvement, so think about continuous improvement initiatives and things like that, now they're reaching a level five, where it's not just about putting the documents in place, but it's about continually improving those documents so they can pivot and they can respond to the changing landscape. Projects are controlled with real-time data. They're able to make real-time decisions. And these organizations oftentimes are now more flexible to innovate because they're actually creating the right controls to be able to view and watch the projects they're working on. So here's the thing. Typically, many people think that documentation stifles innovation. But when we don't have discipline in the work that we're doing, we're actually planning not to innovate because now we're spending more time doing rework and putting out fires than we are actually focusing on innovation. So by putting these levels in place, it actually creates more clarity within the organization so that we can continue to move forward.
That's
And
awesome. We could
I
have
know
a
that was a lot.
podcast. That was great. No, I love that. I love how you walked through each one and realistically what an organization kind of looks like in each one and how to get to the next level, but also understanding where we're at and where we need to be at to get to the next level. So I think that's awesome. And with the processes and pace and empowerment that will push us and encourage us to move to that next step. I think it's also encouraging. I know you said AI kind of makes it a little bit faster nowadays, but it doesn't have to be a week kind of transition. Like it does take time. And I think that's encouraging to know that having those ideas and being able to change, the culture and some processes within your business, it will take time and it will not always be, blink of an eye or perfect. And so I think it's encouraging to know that. You kind of go in at the end of the chapter all about the leading and leading for change and how all of this takes a change of mindset. What does it take for a leader to not just initiate the change, but actually sustain and motivate teams in an organization that may be resistant?
Yeah, so let's talk about this for a second because I think that what I just talked about was a lot of change. It's change management. And so this is where most leaders don't leave enough space for people to actually absorb the changes that we're recommending or we're making. Because no doubt, right, as we document processes, we're going to see, oh, that's an outdated policy or an outdated process. We actually need to change this. And now we're not just documenting the old, we're creating the new on the fly. We're actually realizing where the bottlenecks and the issues exist. And so we need to actually provide time for people to absorb the change. And so, you know, I'll tell you this, like there's a story I talk about in the book where the CIO of this organization came to me and he asked me if I would be willing to take on this role. And he said, "Hey, it's going to be like a turnaround in a startup all in one. And so if you're willing to go on the journey, you're going to really be challenged, you're going to enjoy it, you're going to grow." And he was not kidding. It was quite a challenge. And what I didn't realize is when I took on this team, a lot of the people were jaded, they were cynical, they were not ready to move. And so instead of me coming in and implementing all these changes, I had to spend a lot of time understanding the team's challenges, what they needed in order to be successful, and why change hadn't worked in the past. And in the book, I talk about a lady named Cassandra, and I was having a meeting. I was sitting down with just a bunch of different project managers, and I said, "Hey, here's the change that we need to go on. Here's why." And she was very clear to let me know that there was no way in the world she was going to change. And so she was the most vocal person in the room. She was let me know that she was not happy. And she even said this phrase to me. She said, "There have been 3 changes of the guard since I've been here. There's no point in changing. I'm just going to outlive you in this change." And I thought, wow, Cassandra is going to be one of the hardest people to deal with through this journey. And so I did something a little unorthodox. Instead of just dismissing her and saying, "I'll ensure I include her in no more meetings," I asked her if she would help me lead the change. And surprisingly, she said yes. And my reason for doing that is because whether we know it or not, oftentimes we're more comfortable surrounding ourselves with people who tell us everything we want to hear and love us and enjoy being around us. And anyone who dissents from us, we kind of put them over there in a box and we're like, we're not going to talk to them until this thing is over. But by inviting her in, she actually was saying things that other people were thinking, but she was actually the one that was bold enough to say it. So if I could hear those things early, when it was time to roll things out, what I found is that they actually rolled out smoother because she dissented early and often. But by doing that, I was able to actually bring change about in a more orderly fashion because now I'm actually seeing, okay, these are the real issues. Or when they've done this change 2 other times, here's where they got it wrong. And Cassandra's telling me this. So sometimes, again, going back to our last episode, we don't realize that feedback is a gift. We don't realize that if we will lean into even the dissension and pull kind of the information that we need out of that, we can actually be successful. And something we don't realize is that there is a change curve that is mapped to the basically the change of grief, right? When we go through that grief cycle. And oftentimes when we go through changes, it's the same cycle that we go through, which is denial and shock and frustration, depression even. And if we will hold out for these people that seem like they are just waiting too long to change, we'll actually find that they start to move into experimental. They'll start to experiment with that change. They'll start to decide to change. And eventually, they will be the people that are telling other people about the change. And so often, and this is a big chapter on change, so we can't get into everything, but man, if we will allow people to be able to express their challenges in a healthy way, and if we will really listen to them and ask them to come to the table and help us make changes in a way that's successful, we'll be really surprised at the number of people that are willing to go on that change journey with us.
That's good. That is really powerful, honestly, that it all does consist of change, but what are we going to do about that change? And are we going to, put up a fight for all this change, or are we going to allow it and understand that we might have to go through that grieving process, which is really cool that you even illustrated it like that. Because a lot of people are like, you can't really judge people for grieving. And it's kind of the same way where it's like, you don't know how they're going to take it. They could be angry, they could not want to do it, or they can dive right in. And I think it's important to know that everyone takes change differently. But it is encouraging to be able to be those leaders to empower people through those processes with the right pace and really tie it all together. Do you have any other things from chapter 5 that you want to kind of point out to our listeners before we close?
Yeah, let's end with this. Change is emotional. So build in time for people to be able to feel those emotions. Oftentimes, we move something and then we just expect people to get over it. We've got to build in enough time to communicate that change and allow them to feel the emotion of something big changing in their world. The other thing I would say is people naturally resist change. We all do. So we have to take time to even create space for that resistance and let them talk through those changes with us. And then I would say, change can be managed. We don't realize this, but we can actually get in front of a lot of the things we're changing by allowing people time to talk through their shock, their denial, their frustration, even their depression with the change. And we all know this, but change is very, very hard. So allow people to build in, a bridge to get from one side of the change to the other. Just because they don't buy in right at the beginning, don't count them out. Sometimes they just need time to absorb what you're saying and why you're saying it. And then lastly, know that it's true, not everybody will go on that change journey with you. So give people time to cross the chasm and make the journey to the other side, but also know that not everybody will always make the change. And we want them to, we root for them to change, but not everyone will always make it across.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's clear today that we need to assess where we're at and understand that it doesn't have to be perfect and we are not perfect, and being able to assess where we're at to see where we can move on to the next level in the maturity index, but also implementing that pace correctly and processes and empowering those underneath us. Natalie, today was great. Thank you so much for just everything that we dived into today. Where can our listeners find and follow you?
So you can head over to setitonfire.co to learn more about this book and download the frameworks that go alongside of it. And you can follow me on almost every platform at Innovation Meets Leadership. Moriah, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for interviewing me.
Of course.
Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.